NBC is lying to its viewers about what is going on in the criminal case against Donald Trump with respect to the crimes he committed in trying to overturn the 2020 election. Now, as you know, late yesterday afternoon, the court released Jack Smith's latest filing in that case, which he had to file in order to comply with the Supreme Court's recent immunity decision. Now, this morning, I was scrolling through social media and I came across a clip from the Today Show, which appeared this morning, and they were discussing the latest release by the court. The problem is they were lying about it. Almost everything that they said was wrong, misleading, or outright lying. Now, I'm going to deal with what they said. What I'm going to do in this video is show you the clip that I came across. I'm going to play it in its entirety. Then we're going to discuss it. I'm going to break it down into smaller segments, play them for you, and discuss with you what is going on there and what is wrong about what they're saying, because they're lying. And here's the problem. Most people who watch this don't know that they're lying, or perhaps giving them the benefit of the doubt, misleading out of their own ignorance. But I don't think that's what it is. As you'll see, there are two people talking. One, I believe, is a complete dunce, and she's a complete ignoramus. She has no idea what she's talking about, and she's misleading the audience out of ignorance. The other is a supposed legal expert, and she's outright lying. And I'm going to explain how. But the problem is, most people in the audience who would watch this have no idea that they're being lied to. Look, unless you are a criminal trial lawyer, you don't know that what you're hearing is not true. Okay, so that's where I come in. That's, by the way, one of the reasons I started this channel, is to correct this kind of crap. I'm sick of the lies in the press, either lies or ignorant reporting, because we have reporters covering all kinds of things, most of which they are not subject matter experts on, right? They don't know what they're talking about a lot of the time, and so either through ignorance or through outright deception, they are lying to their audience or presenting wrong information to their audience. And especially where it comes to legal issues, constitutional issues, that's my wheelhouse. And that's why I started this channel, to correct the record, to bring you the truth when I see this lying crap in the press. So take a look at this clip, and then we're going to talk about it. And by the way, at the end of this, I'm going to explain to you why they do what they do. So watch this clip and stick around for my commentary.
I want to turn to NBC senior legal correspondent Laura Jarrett. Let's start with that issue of timing.
Yeah.
Why did the special counsel file this now?
So at first glance, they had to do this because the Supreme Court said you got to figure out what's immune, what's not immune. And the basic distinction that they've defined here is what were things that Trump was doing as an office holder while president, and what was he doing really in his private capacity as an office seeker on the campaign. None of that should be immune. And so the special counsel's office is saying all of the things that he's been charged with now, because there's a superseding indictment, a new indictment, anything that he's been charged with now is completely game on. It's not immune. It shouldn't be shielded. And so we're seeing some new details we hadn't seen in the Jan 6 investigation, we hadn't seen before. Many of the same circumstances, but just like a little bit more fleshing out here.
So this is basically the special counsel trying to salvage its case after this Supreme Court decision, which set off limits a lot of evidence in the case.
Yes.
But again, why now? Because the Trump defense team is saying it's 34 days before an election. There are guidelines from the Department of Justice saying you shouldn't do this kind of thing right before the election.
There's no question this was a choice. Prosecutors know how to move fast when they want to move fast, and they had wanted this to go to trial. But it has no hope of going to trial. And so once you get to the point where you're now in front of
before the election.
Before the election, and if you get to the point where it's now 34 days, you have a choice to make. And you can say, Judge, we want a little bit more time. We want to ask for a scheduling order that would push this out a little bit, but they didn't. And they're saying, well, the judge unsealed it, but they wanted it out there right now. And I think that that's why this Trump team is saying, wait a minute, but there's a 60-day rule. Now, they could say, arguably, it doesn't fall under the rule that says you don't take any major investigative step because he's already been indicted, right? But again,
it's 160 pages of a narrative of the case against Donald Trump.
While he's running for re-election.
34 days before election. Yes. By the way, reminiscent of James Comey reopening his investigation into Hillary Clinton in 2016, a couple weeks before the election. Also, fought by the defense
the specter of that ghost, I think, certainly looms over this. And I think that's why they were leaning on the court unsealing it. But no question, this is going to have continued fallout.
Laura, thank you very much.
Yep.
Okay, so that is the clip that I came across in its entirety. I did not watch the Today Show live. I did not cut anything out of this clip. This is the clip as I saw it in its entirety. Now, I'm sure a lot of you can immediately recognize a lot of what is wrong in there. I know this is a smart audience, and I'm sure that many of you can recognize some of the lies there. But what I want to do is break this down. So I'm going to cut this video up a little bit, and we're going to talk about each individual segment, and let me explain to you exactly what's going on and why what they are saying is wrong and why these lies are so insidious. So let's look at this first clip from Savannah Guthrie. By the way, this woman has no idea what she's talking about.
Yes.
But again, why now? Because the Trump defense team is saying it's 34 days before an election. There are guidelines from the Department of Justice saying you shouldn't do this kind of thing right before the election.
That is not true at all. There is no such guideline from the Department of Justice. Let's talk about what that guideline is, because there is a guideline, but it's not as she purports it to be. First of all, you notice I used the word guideline. It's just a guideline. This is not a law. This is not an enforceable rule of any kind. This is an internal Department of Justice guideline, okay? And what that guideline says is that prosecutors within the Department of Justice should try, and it's not a ironclad rule, but it's a general guideline. They should try not to start an investigation within 60 days of an election if that investigation is likely to have an impact on the election. That's all it says. And it's not an absolute requirement that the prosecutors cannot undertake such an investigation within 60 days, just that they should try to avoid it if at all possible. Now, it's obvious, isn't it, that that guideline does not apply to this situation, right? Or it should be. And why is that? Because we are not in an investigation. The investigation phase of this ended a long time ago. We are fully in the criminal trial phase of this. And by the way, the guideline is that you should not commence an investigation within 60 days of an election. Okay. What happens if you had already started an investigation a year ago and then it's still ongoing and then you get to within 60 days of the election? Is the DOJ just supposed to stop their investigation? No, it only applies to the commencement of an investigation within 60 days. And again, it doesn't apply. The investigation phase was over a long time ago. The investigation phase ended the moment the grand jury returned an indictment against Donald Trump. And that happened a long time ago. That happened over a year ago. Okay, so the investigation phase was over more than a year ago. And as soon as a criminal indictment is returned, that indictment is now in the hands of the court. So now let's really get into this. Let's take a look more closely at what Laura Jarrett said here.
There are guidelines from the Department of Justice saying you shouldn't do this kind of thing right before the election.
There's no question this was a choice.
Okay, so their legal expert, so-called, Laura Jarrett, says, quote, "There's no question this was a choice." No, there's no question this was not a choice by Jack Smith. Let's review exactly how it is that we got here so that you understand why this happened when it happened. Okay, so there was an investigation, a long investigation. They finally returned an indictment. The grand jury returned an indictment against Donald Trump. Now, that case is no longer in the hands of the Department of Justice. Once the grand jury returns an indictment, what happens with that indictment? It gets filed with the court. The court is now in complete control of the process. The DOJ is no longer in control. The DOJ is just one of the parties in that case. There's the prosecution, and now the defense is brought into it. So the DOJ is now nothing but a party before the court, which now has the indictment, and it is the court who is in complete control. So what happens? The court sets a trial schedule, or a framework for a trial schedule. They set a trial date. Usually that trial date moves depending upon what happens pre-trial. Okay, so they set a trial date, and in the meantime, working their way up to the trial date, all kinds of pre-trial activity has to take place. There are all kinds of motions that happen, discovery that happens. They have arguments, legal arguments over the admissibility of evidence. All this kind of stuff happens in pre-trial motions, filings with the court, potentially evidentiary and legal hearings that the court conducts leading up to the trial. Okay, so that was the position we were in when Donald Trump filed, among other things, a motion to dismiss the entire case. And the legal basis upon which he filed that motion was to claim that he had absolute immunity from prosecution because he was president. Now, as soon as he filed that and the judge made her ruling, both sides had arguments on the defense motion to dismiss. The judge made her ruling. She denied his motion to dismiss. Donald Trump's side appealed it. While that was on appeal, everything else in the case stopped, pending resolution of Trump's appeal. So it went up to the circuit court, the D.C. Circuit Court, and a 3-panel judge from the D.C. Circuit Court heard that case. We heard oral arguments. The audio portion was broadcast. We all heard it. The court finally issued their ruling against Donald Trump, saying, no, you have no such immunity. Donald Trump appealed to the Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court did not have to take the case. Okay? It's not a requirement. They get to decide whether they're going to take the case or not. If they chose not to take the case, then the D.C. Circuit Court's ruling would hold. The case would go back to the trial court, and the trial court judge would resume proceedings in the criminal trial. But the court decided to get involved. And instead of moving quickly, the court decided to drag this out as long as possible. It delayed even hearing this case for months and months. And then, after it heard the case, it delayed issuing its opinion until the last day of its term, just dragging out this process as long as they possibly could. And then they issued a ridiculous, in many ways, thoroughly anti-American ruling. I don't want to get into the ruling right now, but that's what happened. They ruled to a large degree in favor of Donald Trump. They did not say that a president has absolute immunity. What they said is that a president has complete immunity for any official acts. He cannot be prosecuted for any official acts. And so the question is, what is an official act and what is not an official act? And they gave some guidance, but very little. So what happens then is that ruling, the Supreme Court ruling, kicks the case back down to the trial judge, because the Supreme Court did not dismiss the case. The Supreme Court could have ruled that Donald Trump has absolute immunity and therefore the case is dismissed. They did not do that. They said he is not absolutely immune. He is absolutely immune for official acts, but not unofficial acts. And some things might be official acts, but he could still be prosecuted for them if the prosecutors overcome an evidentiary burden that the court placed, okay? So anyways, the whole thing goes back to the trial court judge with instructions from the Supreme Court to apply the ruling of the Supreme Court to the facts of the case to determine which allegations remain and which allegations must be dismissed and thrown out of the indictment. So what happened at that point? Well, Jack Smith looked at this ruling, looked at all of his evidence, took the evidence out of the case that he thought the Supreme Court ruling would prohibit, and he filed a new indictment taking all of the prohibited stuff out and putting more stuff in that would comply with the Supreme Court's ruling. Okay, so he filed a new indictment with a new grand jury. That indictment gets filed with the judge, and the trial court proceedings resume. Now, as soon as it gets back to the trial court, again, remember, the judge is in charge of the proceedings. The judge is in charge of the timing. The DOJ is no more in control of the case than the defense attorney is. They are just a party. They are just one of the two parties before the court. The court is in complete control. So what did the court do? The court said, okay, I want briefing on this whole Supreme Court issue. We need to figure out what's admissible, what's not admissible. So the first thing was how they go about it. Because the judge is going to have to make factual determinations. So they can do that. The judge could do that one of two ways. Either the judge could hold evidentiary hearings where they would call witnesses. The prosecution would have to put on witnesses to lay out the evidence for the judge so the judge can determine what evidence stays in and what evidence can't come in. So they could have done that, essentially had a mini trial. This would have been without a jury, would have been just for the court, for the judge to decide these evidentiary issues as required by the Supreme Court. Well, Donald Trump's team did not want to have a mini trial. Donald Trump's team did not want to have witnesses come in and testify against him and lay out the evidence against him. The other option is to do this by written motion, where the prosecutor can lay out in writing what his evidence is so the judge could see it and make a determination of what stays in and what doesn't. That is what Donald Trump's team wanted. So that is what Jack Smith did. He filed a motion. He made a filing with the court laying out all of this information. He filed that last week. It was under seal. It was not released to the public. The reason it was under seal was to give the defense an opportunity to make legal arguments as to why it should not be released to the public, because Donald Trump didn't want any of this to get out to the public. So the court put it under seal so that she could listen to his arguments, and if he had persuasive arguments as to why it shouldn't be released, then perhaps she wouldn't have released it. But you have to have legal arguments. There has to be a legal reason for not releasing this, because all filings in a trial are public. These are public filings. These are public trials. Anything that is filed with the court, a motion, a response to a motion, other kinds of filings, that's all available to the public. You can go down to the courthouse right now and pick some criminal case and get copies of the motions in that case if you want to, because they are public record. So the court has to have a legal reason. The defense has to come up with a legal reason for the judge not to release those things. And he had no legal reason. He just didn't want it released because he thought it would damage him politically. Well, that's not a valid legal reason. And let me remind you that Judge Chutkan, from the very beginning of this case, when it first got into her court, before Trump's motion to dismiss, before it went up to the Supreme Court, she made very clear at the very beginning of this process that the election and politics would have absolutely no bearing on this case, that they are irrelevant to the case and would not factor into any decisions she made in the case. And she reiterated that again, made very clear when the case came back to her from the Supreme Court. Okay, so the politics was never going to play an issue at all. And so we are here because this is what Donald Trump wanted, right? Donald Trump, he didn't have to do any of this delay stuff. Okay? He's out there saying this is a witch hunt. He's out there saying this is election interference. He's out there saying I'm completely innocent. This is a sham trial. This is all fake information, fake news, witch hunt. If that were true, he could have had his trial months ago. Okay? Jack Smith did not orchestrate this so that this could be, sprung on the American people the month before the election. Jack Smith tried to get this to trial months ago. And Donald Trump could have had this. He could have had his trial months ago. And if he's innocent, as he's telling everybody, he could have proven it. He could have shown the whole world that this was a phony witch hunt, and he could have been found not guilty by now. So instead of having this information come out the month before the election and him throwing a fit about it, he could have had an acquittal. He could have been found not guilty. He could have been headed into this election having been found not guilty of all of this. But he didn't do that. I wonder why that is. So keep in mind that, as I said, the court controls this. So Jack Smith made his filing last week. The judge heard arguments as to whether or not that filing should be made public. Donald Trump had no legal reason to keep it under seal. He offered no legal basis to keep it under seal. He just didn't want it out because of politics. That's not a sufficient legal reason, so Judge Chutkan did what she is supposed to do. She released it, and that happened yesterday. So that's where we are. The reason this came out is because that is the legal process. Now let me show you this next clip. Here's more Laura Jarrett.
There's no question this was a choice. Prosecutors know how to move fast when they want to move fast, and they had wanted this to go to trial. But it has no hope of going to trial. And so once you get to the point where you're now in front of
before
the judge, before the election, and if you get to the point where it's now 34 days, you have a choice to make, and you can say, Judge, we want a little bit more time. We want to ask for a scheduling order that would push this out a little bit, but they didn't.
So here's Laura Jarrett saying that because this trial is obviously not going to happen before the election, that Jack Smith should have delayed it. Well, Jack Smith doesn't get to delay it. Okay? He does not control the timing. And remember, the judge made very clear the election is not going to be a factor in this at all. The judge is scheduling this whole thing. So what Laura Jarrett is saying is that Jack Smith should have asked for a delay. He should have said, Judge, we'd like to have some more time. To which the judge would have said, why? Why do you want more time? Okay, the judge doesn't give the prosecutor whatever he wants just because he asked for it. So if Jack Smith said, we'd like some more time, she'd say, why do you need more time? Because, and let me tell you something, judges very rarely give the prosecutors more time. Okay, when the prosecutor asks for more time, they usually cannot. Believe me, I've been on the receiving end of this. They'll say, what do you mean? Why do you need more time? You're the one who brought the case. You should have brought the case when you were ready to bring the case. The fact that you brought it to me tells me that you're ready. I shouldn't have to be giving you any more time. Now, the defense is usually entitled to more time because, you know, they're defending all of this stuff. They're reacting to this stuff. So when judges give more time, they're usually much more deferential to the defense. So anyways, Laura Jarrett says that prosecutor Jack Smith should have said, Judge, we need more time. The judge would have said, why? And then what's Jack Smith supposed to say? He doesn't have a legal reason. He's ready to go. So he has no legal reason that he needs more time. But I guess he's supposed to ask for more time to benefit Donald Trump politically. That's what Laura Jarrett says the prosecutor is supposed to do. He's supposed to ask for more time. He's supposed to ask to delay this thing in order to benefit the defendant's election chances. That's what Laura Jarrett is saying to you. How ridiculous is that? And by the way, if that's the basis upon which the prosecutor would be asking for a delay, which is absurd on its face, again, he has no legal reason to delay it. That's the same reason the defense is asking for the delay. So let the defense ask, and he has asked. He's asked many times. The defense asks for a delay for political reasons nearly every time he gets up and addresses the court. She's already said no to that and reiterated, I am not going to delay this for political reasons. So this whole idea that Jack Smith, number one, should ask for a delay is just absurd. For the prosecutor to ask to delay the trial in order to benefit the defendant politically, that's just an absurd thing to even say. But on top of that, the judge was not going to delay this anyway. She's made that very, very clear. So the idea that Laura Jarrett is putting out there that Jack Smith decided to do this now. Jack Smith decided to release this now. Jack Smith could have postponed this by asking the judge for a delay. The whole thing is absurd. And it's insulting to anybody who understands this process at all. And that leads me to my question. Is Laura Jarrett remember, she's their legal expert, okay? Does she not understand how criminal trials work? Does she not understand that the judge controls the process? Or is she just lying to the audience? And if she is lying to the audience, why? Well, the answer to that, in my opinion, is yes, she knows she's lying. And as to the why, I'll explain at the end of this video. But for now, let's move on to the next clip from legal expert Laura Jarrett.
And they're saying, well, the judge unsealed it, but they wanted it out there right now. And I think that that's why this Trump team is saying, wait a minute, but there's a 60-day rule.
So now she says, oh, but they said the judge unsealed it. Well, the judge did unseal it. It's not up to the prosecutor whether or not this is made public. It's up to the judge whether or not it is made public. And as I explained, everything in a criminal trial is public unless there's a legal reason not to release it. So the judge is required by law to release this unless there is a legal reason not to. And there is no legal reason not to release it here. So this idea that, she's making it sound like Jack Smith saying, but the judge released it, like it's just an excuse. No, that's a factually accurate thing. The judge did release it, and the judge is required by law to release it. So even if Jack Smith, for whatever damn reason, were to have said to the judge, Judge, we don't want you to release this either, the judge is required by law to say, tough shit. Unless there's a legal reason for me not to release this, I'm supposed to release this. This is public information. The courts are public. They're part of the government. This has to be released. So Jack Smith, whether he wants it released or not, is irrelevant. And whether the judge wants it released or not is irrelevant. This is not upon anyone's personal whims or desires. There's law at play here. And this is required by law to be released. And then she said, oh, well, but maybe the judge released it, but they wanted it released. Okay, they wanted it released now, is what she said. Okay, well, number one, that's rank speculation as to what they wanted. She's implying that Jack Smith is acting politically here and that he wanted it released now in order to damage Donald Trump. That is Laura Jarrett, NBC's legal expert. That is what she is insinuating here with no proof. This is just rank speculation. This is a political hit job to say that the prosecutor engineered this release now. And while maybe it's technically true that the court released it, Jack Smith wanted it released right now, i.e., for political reasons. That is rank speculation. It's irresponsible and it's pathetic. Now, again, as I said, well, what if he did want it out there for whatever reason? So what? Okay, wasn't part of the legal motions. They were arguing the law. And okay, so even if he did want it released, well, guess what? The defense didn't want it released. And remember what I said? There's two parties. Jack Smith has no more power over this entire process now than the defense attorney. Both sides get to make their arguments. Okay, and personal desires don't come into it at all. So even though Laura Jarrett is implying that Jack Smith wanted this out for political reasons, an allegation for which she has no evidence, she's rank speculation, well, whatever. So maybe he did. Well, the defense doesn't want it out for political reasons. But guess what? Neither of those things are legal reasons. So this was going to come out no matter what Jack Smith wanted, no matter what the defense wanted. Oh, and by the way, about Jack Smith wanting it out there, you know when he wanted it out there? Months ago. Okay? And the court wanted this out months ago too. The court, months and months and months ago, denied Donald Trump's motion to dismiss. This thing should already have gone to trial. Okay? And by the way, these are public trials. You know why they're public trials? Because the public has a right to know this stuff. So, wanting this out there, Jack Smith didn't want this out there now, 34 days before an election. Jack Smith wanted this out there months ago. So this could have been decided long before the election. And so did Judge Chutkan. You know why it's being released now? Because the Supreme Court got involved with this case when it didn't have to, and then intentionally dragged their feet, right? They could have issued an opinion very, very quickly, and they have shown themselves to be rank partisans. When it is in Donald Trump's political benefit for the court to move quickly, they do. When it's in Donald Trump's political benefit for the court to take its sweet ass time, that's what they do. Case in point, the Colorado ballot case, where Colorado disqualified Donald Trump from the ballot for having engaged in insurrection. That was appealed up to the Supreme Court, and they decided that case like that. Super quick. Why? Because it benefited Donald Trump to have that case decided quickly. Then this immunity case, they took their sweet ass time just to decide whether or not they were going to take it. Every step of the way, the Supreme Court has done everything they can to drag this out for as long as they can. They took forever to decide whether or not to take it. And then once they decided to take it, they took their sweet ass time to hear it and then took their sweet ass time to issue their opinion on it. So this information is coming out 34 days before the election because Donald Trump didn't want to have a trial, tried to delay it, and then the Supreme Court delayed it as much as they possibly could, and so here we are. If Donald Trump wanted his day in court to prove that this was a baseless witch hunt, he could have been exonerated with a not guilty verdict 6 months ago. All right? But he and the Supreme Court dragged this out, and that's why we are where we are now. And it's not for Jack Smith to decide when things happen in this criminal procedure. Okay? And once cases get filed, they're not just put on hold, as Laura Jarrett is implying happens. That doesn't happen. There's such a thing called a speedy trial. Criminal trials move quickly. Civil trials take forever. Criminal trials move quickly because both the defendant and the public have a right to a speedy trial. So there has to be a good damn reason for there to be a pause in the proceedings. There's already been a long pause. That's because Donald Trump filed his motion to dismiss, and then the Supreme Court took forever. There is no reason now to delay this thing anymore. And an election, because the defendant is involved in an election, is not a legal reason for denying for delaying the case. And the judges can't just willy-nilly delay these cases because they think it should be for whatever reason. And the only reason to do it here would be to help the defendant politically. That's not a legal reason. The judge has to have a legal friggin' reason to do what the judge does. The judge is not just, it's not rule by personal whim. There's a rule of law. The judge has to apply the law. All right? And there's the law that she has to apply when she's dealing with criminal proceedings is speedy trial. Move this shit along. So Laura Jarrett either has no idea what she's talking about. I don't know what her background is. I don't know what makes her a legal expert. I'm assuming she has a law degree. Is it because she's a law degree and she looks good on camera? Is that why she got the job? I don't know. Maybe she's an accomplished trial lawyer and that's why she got the job. But let me tell you something. If she is an accomplished trial lawyer, okay, if she knows anything about the criminal process, then she's friggin' lying to you. Okay? She either doesn't know what she's talking about or she's a liar. Now I want you to watch this one final segment.
Now, they could say, arguably, it doesn't fall under the rule that says you don't take any major investigative step because he's already been indicted, right? But again, it's
160 pages of a narrative of the case against Donald Trump.
While he's running for re-election.
34 days before election. Yes. By the way, reminiscent of James Comey reopening his investigation into Hillary Clinton in 2016, a couple weeks before the election.
So she says, arguably, they could say arguably it doesn't fall within the 60-day guideline. No, there's no arguably about it. It's not arguably at all. As I said, this only applies to investigations and the beginning of investigations. We're long past that. There's no arguably about this. And then they're back to whining about this being done 34 days before the election. And Savannah Guthrie saying, oh, this is reminiscent of when James Comey, blah, 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 2 weeks before the... You know what's election interference? NBC News lying to their audience. Because that's what they're getting at. They're both implying that this is intentionally being done by the prosecutor, which I have explained to you is a lie, and that it's being done to interfere with the election. You know what I could say is election interference? NBC lying to their audience about this 34 days before an election. How about that? Leaving the impression with the audience without outright saying it that Jack Smith is doing a political hit job on Donald Trump, that Jack Smith orchestrated this to release this information 34 days before an election to hurt Donald Trump. And here they are lying about the 60-day rule, lying about Jack Smith's control over the process, lying about all of it. This major story about the former president of the United States and his criminal trial for having tried to steal the last election. We're 34 days before an election, and they are lying about the criminal case against him, lying about it. Can make a case that that is election interference. You know what else is election interference? The Supreme Court abandoning all their norms, not handling this case in the way they would have handled any other case, for the sole reason to help Donald Trump. That sounds like election interference to me. Do they say that? No. What do? They lie about what Jack Smith is doing. They're lying about the court process. All to paint the picture that put upon Donald Trump is the subject, is the victim of a coordinated attempt to interfere with this election. It's a lie. Now, why does NBC do it? This is the final thing I'll leave you with. Why does NBC do something like this? As I said, it's either out of ignorance or they know better and they are doing this intentionally. Now, Savannah Guthrie, my opinion, clearly an idiot. She has absolutely no idea what she's talking about. The problem is, when you don't know what you're talking about, shut your damn mouth. If you don't know what you're talking about, don't say anything. Millions of people are listening to you. If you don't know what you're talking about, then don't say anything on this subject. Right? Savannah Guthrie, clueless. She has no idea what she's talking about. Laura Jarrett, she's lying. All right? She's lying. Or at least in my opinion, she's lying. So why are they doing it? They're doing it. Is it because NBC wants Donald Trump elected? They might, because Donald Trump is good for ratings, right? They may very well want they're doing it either to help Donald Trump. Let me put it this way. It's all about money. No matter what they're doing, it's all about money. Either they're doing this to help Donald Trump get elected. Why? Because he's good for ratings and that means more money for them. Or they are doing it so as not to offend Trump supporters in their audience. Okay? They had to cover this, right? They had to cover. There's no way they can not cover. They can't pretend to be a serious news organization and not cover this story. So they had to cover it. But if they covered it and just told the facts about it, all the Trump cultists in the audience would be up in arms and accuse NBC of trying to hurt Donald Trump. And what would they do? They wouldn't watch NBC anymore. We know this. We know that whenever Trump cultists hear anything they don't want to hear, they blame the messenger and they stop watching. So if you have millions of Trump supporters saying, we're not watching NBC anymore, we're not watching the Today Show anymore, because they told us stuff we don't want to believe, we don't want to hear it, so we're not watching them anymore, then they would lose money, right? Their audience would shrink. They can't charge as much for advertising. They would lose money. So instead, what do? Instead of just telling them the truth about this, they do this bullshit. Okay, they cover the story, but then they cover it in such a way as to both cover the story and make the Trump cultists feel better about it. You know, they're kind of telling them, without explicitly saying it, that yeah, this is all a witch hunt. This is all politically orchestrated to hurt Donald Trump. Jack Smith didn't have to do this. This is a political hit job, because that's what the Trump cult wants to hear. And that's what they did. They said that without explicitly saying it, which is really dastardly in my opinion. So anyways, that's it. I'm sure when I'm done recording, I'll think of a bunch more I want to say about this, but you know, this video is already way too long. If you've stuck with me to the end of this thing, I really do appreciate it. So that's it. Thanks for watching. Talk to you again soon.